HexrayVision from Cuatro Cinco Studios somewhere in southern Utah. And today I've got a guest that I have been wanting to get for a long time. I'm very excited to introduce the one and only Balietbran, chop it up with him and catch up from when we met each other. The first time I met him in person was back in Vegas. I walked up to him. It was like meeting a hex celebrity, or as we call them, hex celebrity. When he was streaming a long time ago, I would jump on there, and every time he would give me a shout out, it just tickled me pink. And back then I was still driving trucks, so I was watching every stream I could get my hands on. At that time, there was nothing to do but drive the truck. I'm a big fan of Balietbran, and I feel like I know him a lot more than he knows me. So following this publication, I'm going to be joining him on his channel when this comes out. So look for that as well. I'll hand it over to you, Balietbran.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. It was really cool to meet you for the first time in Vegas, and everyone else too, because when I make the videos, it's never with the intention, as you mentioned, where it's like, oh, these are going to get traction and kind of become like celebrity type of deal. But it was really cool to see someone like yourself, because I'd remembered that you had the tattoo that I saw before Vegas. And then you showed me in person, and I was like, man, that thing is really cool. And, it's just awesome how many people we have in the Hex community that are like-minded. And now we're all kind of succeeding together. And it's just something that's like a snowball that's going downhill. It's just getting bigger and bigger. And, it's just the beginning still.
I'm incredibly excited right now. I know a lot about you, or what's going on now in your life by following your streams. But take us back to childhood, little Balietbran, like growing up. I know you have a bunch of brothers. What was that like? What was school like for you? What hobbies did you like? And were you a good student?
Honestly, I wasn't a good student, not at all. I was always kind of just curious about kind of how systems worked and how the actual real world worked, because growing up, you'd have that the parents tell you, or things that you see when you're obviously with your parents and with your family, and then you'd kind of have like the stuff that happens during school and the tests and whatnot. And for me, I mean, geometry was always pretty cool as far as like subjects go. But as far as most of school, man, wasn't a huge fan, to be honest. It was kind of like a torture for me, especially being really introverted and not having a whole bunch of friends in school. I kind of just stuck to, some of the subjects that were at hand. And then once the actual subjects were over, I played football a little bit, but even still, that was kind of forced upon. It's kind of like one sport that we had to play. And that was one of them that all my other brothers had played. So I would play that after the school session had ended. But honestly, once I had the opportunity to do like a Running Start, which is a program that I could do college and high school, I took that as soon as I could, because I wanted to just like escape the experience and actually have some real world experience. That's the reason why when I mentioned that I didn't like it as much, because I knew that most of this stuff wasn't really actually going to benefit me in the real world. So I'd wanted to just get to that part immediately versus just wasting any time.
That's cool. And you grew up in Washington State?
Yeah.
I'm not trying to dox you. I'm just trying to get
no, not at all. Yeah, I dox myself, It's better than like people trying to hold it over my head. So yeah, I was born in like Federal Way, Washington area, and then grew up in Maple Valley most of my life. So went to school in the Tahoma School District. That's where I went to high school, junior high, all of that. And then once we graduated, it wasn't very long before my dad and a couple of my older brothers that I was living with, they had gotten some jobs on the east side of the area. So just maybe like an hour away to Bellevue, Seattle area. And so we all moved over there. And then soon enough, I had found some work at that time too. But that was kind of the time that I had found Hex and gotten into crypto. And you can do that from anywhere in the world if it's not something that you actually need to be at a place for. So that was really cool to kind of move and, get away from the main home city and then kind of just expand from there.
You're the youngest of brothers, is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm 25. I just turned 25. My oldest brother, Steve, he's 31.
Do you think there's an advantage did they give you a heads up of what to expect in life, or do they just pick on you mercilessly?
No, they definitely gave me advantage. It was cool because my parents always made sure that we had like a good relationship and that we were more friends than we were enemies. When I would hang out with like my older brother's friends, because I didn't really have many of my own, just most of the kids in my grade, I was just like, man, none of these kids are mature enough. And at least in my perception, that I wanted to hang out with my older brother's friends. Yeah, they did a really good job of being inclusive, which was pretty cool. But I grew up around them and grew up really, really quickly. And I enjoyed it, man. I wouldn't erase or rewind any of the time. I think a lot of it has made me kind of who I am today. But I've also been able to learn from some of their successes, but also some of their failures as well. So I wouldn't have to make them myself.
That is a huge advantage. I'm glad you weren't just a whipping boy growing
Yeah,
up.
no,
That's
definitely
great.
not.
We share another thing in common. You helped host the Seattle meetup for the 5555 tour, and I helped host the Salt Lake. What did you learn during that experience that you didn't think you were going to get out of it?
A lot of it was kind of the restrictions, like some of the restaurant that we were trying to go to. The day before the actual meetup itself, we were hanging out for like a little music video type of thing and just a little gathering. And there was maybe like 30 or 40 of us. The thing that we had kind of faced all as a group, I guess, when we were trying to look for a good restaurant to go eat at after doing some of this music video was just like some of the wait times, or there's not a big enough table for you guys, stuff like this. And so we were able to kind of finally find a place that was big enough and that had a big enough atmosphere where we could all kind of sit down in a general vicinity and hang out and get some food. But honestly, I learned a lot. I mean, when it comes to planning something, you always want to make sure that you're prepared and that you're kind of ready to tackle anything that happens as it comes, because there's always something unexpected, right? It can come up and you got to just be able to roll with the punches and kind of just follow through.
Let's pretend that you are going to put on your own Hex meetup. What would that look like if Balietbran did his very own Hex meetup?
I probably wouldn't even be doing it at a venue. It would probably be outside. If it was going to be in the Seattle area, which I'm looking at the waterfront right now, it might just be like some sort of like park or something, like obviously where the weather is nice. But I don't know if I would want to restrict myself or everyone else to an inside gathering, things like that, especially if you're down here in downtown. I'd rather be looking at, one of the cool parks that have nice views, or just be somewhere that's got a more of an open environment where people can kind of leave and come as they go, but they don't have to feel like, like they're being enclosed in like a room or something like that,
Like in a
just something.
container?
Yeah, exactly. Because, rooms can get pretty tight sometimes, and, you can kind of get, I don't know, claustrophobic, I guess, if you see a whole bunch of people piling in and, the room's already almost like a concert, getting more
Yeah.
compact and compact. And so for me, I like to, that's the other thing, is I don't even know how many people would show up in this theory, but my guess is that if you have like an open field or, some sort of park that you're at, then at least you got enough room for the job, I guess.
That's something I noticed with Hexicans is Hexicans are excited and they love to talk about Hex. So in a small area, it gets really loud really quickly, to the point like people that aren't part of the Hex group are all checking you out like, what is a fight about to break out? Like, why are these guys so loud?
It's true, man. I've never seen a group that had more passion, and never been a part of something that was like I mentioned, I did some football and stuff growing up, but none of that was like the camaraderie and the community that my brothers had experienced. And so I was always kind of looking for that like opportunity where like, oh, hey, some people that I can actually relate to and things like this. And the Hexicans were that group. And so yeah, now I totally understand what you mean and what they mean when, yeah, things can kind of, build up pretty quickly if you're just someone on the outside not knowing what's going on.
Let me ask you, switch gears here from imaginary to the real world. How do you think your perception or your philosophies or even your life view has changed since you got involved with Hex and since you retired?
I guess I'll just use the latter question first. I mean, myself and actually Hextech have talked about this a little bit, but once you solve that problem of the time, like the time problem of not having to, like you mentioned a little bit, driving trucks, which I didn't know, because I used to, my job before this, I was managing truck drivers and deliveries out here into Seattle and Bellevue, residential and commercial. But it
God
really made,
bless you.
yeah. Well,
That's not easy.
thankfully it was two drivers that I was really cool with, and I
Yeah.
know what you mean. Not all drivers were easy to work with, but like I'm glad I had my crew here in Bellevue. I kind of just learned like the importance of time, right? Because once you are not having to work for someone else and clock in X amount of hours per week, now you've got all the time in the world, and it's like, well, what are you going to do with all of this time? You know, and so I've had the YouTube channel even before I retired and things like this, but part of me just wants to use some of the outreach or some of even like the current following and subscribers, and you know, just use that for just further and continued education to hopefully get people to a similar position, because it's as Richard has said, where you know, to fix the world, you want to fix the money first. And so he wanted to get everyone wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. So that way, once the money problem solved, now it's like, okay, can we solve some bigger problems that are all coming to face us? Because this really is what's the most important, in my opinion.
Yeah. What have you found has been some effective ways to explain Hex to new people or people that aren't technical? Because I know I have a hard time breaking stuff down because I've been in this rabbit hole for so long. I forget what it was like when I first ran into, Bitcoin and crypto back in the day and had to learn this new language.
If you know something, then you can explain it to someone like they're five. Like the whole keep it simple, stupid concept, where you know, just because you know these fancy words doesn't mean you need to use them, because the person's probably not going to understand them. So when I'm saying that as a preface, it's that the more simple that you can make it, the better. And so when people ask me like what Hex is, or they're not understanding it, I explain to them a little bit about Bitcoin first, because Hex is, from like a very high level view, it is very similar to Bitcoin. It just doesn't have the, it doesn't have the yield generation, and the way that it does its mining is just a little bit differently, whether it's proof of stake to proof of work, which Bitcoin has. But the point that I'm getting at is to, to teach someone well, you kind of have to understand where they're coming at from first. Like, what do they know about, not only crypto, but what do they know about the dollar or fiat in general, right? Do they know that their dollar that they're earning every week or every other week, do they know that that thing is just being printed into oblivion, and that it's devaluing the actual amount of dollars that are in supply currently? And do they understand the idea of supply and demand? Because if they do, then something like Hex is not just completely, inflationary. It's got, parts of its aspect in the supply that make it more rare and more scarce for those that are staking it, and for those that are, holding it for long terms of time. So I kind of just get a, a rough base of where that person's from. For my older brothers, for example, they didn't get it at first either, but my grandparents, they would give us savings bonds growing up. There were 15-year savings bonds that for our birthday and for Christmas, it would start from a $25 principal, and then 15 years later, it would mature to 50. And so I kind of use that analogy for them sometimes. And with one of the brothers, it wasn't clicking until I used that analogy, and then it finally did click. Hexicans have the tools of things like Staker.app, right? We've got things that you can just show someone. You don't even have to tell them. You can just show them, hey, here's what I have, and here's how the interest was accumulating today. And then once they see that for themselves, or once they see that the success is happening for you, then they might be more, they might be willing to learn a little bit more and sit down and ask some of those questions.
How has it been with family and friends trying to help them out with Hex?
When we got the Uniswap airdrop way back in the day, I think it might have been like September a long time ago, whenever we got the Uniswap airdrop, I had a few wallets that was able to free claim, and I instead of using those wallets for just boosting up my own bags, I ended up just taking that opportunity to create my family, the girlfriend, the mom, and the dad their own wallets. So they had their own MetaMask set up with, their own seed phrase. All of it's offline, right? It's not ever associated with the internet. It's all in analog form, just on a piece of paper. But they have their own Staker apps. They have, the knowledge of how to end stake or how to navigate, I guess, MetaMask. But that's all because I've showed them in a StreamYard backyard where you can show the screen if they're not close to you, or if it's in person, I've been able to kind of show them like, hey, go to the Fox and here's where you can kind of see. But most of the stakes themselves, I already set them up without them kind of having the option. So anymore, they just look at the Staker app because it's not like they can do anything, right? It's not like they're going to end their stakes early.
I find that Hex is much more convincing than I am when it comes to people that grew up with me, because they've seen all the crazy stuff that I've done, and they're like, oh, here goes Max again. But once, you set them up and they see that interest, they see it double and double and double again, you don't have to convince them anymore. And then they're bringing me people like friends, neighbors, colleagues. They're like, hey, will you help out so and so? So what do you think about, I mean, Richard Hart talks a lot about outboarding, like out
Mm-hmm.
messaging.
Outbound messaging. Yep.
Outboarding. I think outboarding is a motor for a boat. Okay, so to silver again. All right, so Richard Hart talks about outbound messaging as the way to get this out there, the way to get it to go viral, because it is so pre-viral, it's crazy.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
there's a lot of people in crypto that now have heard the name Hex because we are relentless and we're loud and we're passionate, but they still have no idea what it is. And then outside of crypto, I finally met somebody yesterday at the gym that came in and he was like, hey, are those your like Hex and Pulse stickers on the back of your car? And I'm like, yeah, yeah, they are. He's like, yeah, my buddy just bought like a house cash. Like he's moving over here and doing this and he's really into it. So I was like,
Yeah.
that was the first time I actually bumped into someone I didn't get into Hex like organically. What does outbound messaging look like?
The quickest and easiest answer that I can give as far as that is honestly just wearing a whole bunch of the clothing, right? So right now I'm just wearing one of the Hex shirts that I've got. Just bought this one off of Amazon actually, but I've pretty much got Hex stuff everywhere. So yeah, whether it's a t-shirt that I'm wearing in this apartment now, or when we're going out, I've got a couple of different coats that one of them's like really colorful of Hex and Pulse, and then the other one's kind of just more laid back and almost looks more like stylish, I guess, or fancy with just Hex, and it's in a different gradient. But generally, it's just by wearing the actual merch itself, right? I'm not a guy that used to wear merch with like Nike and Jordan and stuff like that because I could just care less usually at the time. But with something like Hex, yeah, it's something that I'm passionate about and something that I have gotten a lot of comments on just from people that didn't know what it was, but they liked the logo or they liked the necklace. But I mean, as far as outbound messaging goes, just the other day I was with some Hexicans here in the Washington State area, and we were just getting some lunch, hanging out. And there was someone behind us that was kind of like eavesdropping that had heard that we were in crypto too. And so once he had kind of made that introduction that, hey, he was into crypto as well, we had kind of brought him over to the table and started talking a little bit about it. But for me, it's just when the time is right, like I'm not going to like evangelize to every random person that, hey, they should be joining Hex, because, I don't think that approach works very well.
It
But when you
doesn't.
mention it, well,
It
it doesn't.
doesn't.
It's just like
Trust
anything
me, I've
else.
done that.
It's like going door to door, and uh, anyways, so that doesn't work very well. But the thing that has worked very well is not myself, but someone else that must be in the Seattle area has put some stickers everywhere. I'm not too sure, but I've been walking across the street sometimes and seeing, a few, because there's a lot of stickers in Seattle and there's a lot of like posters and whatnot in Seattle. But I've seen a handful of Hex stickers that had like the 40% APY, the Hex.com, some of these things that were plastered kind of everywhere. And I'm not condoning whether people do or don't do that kind of stuff, but all I'm saying is, hey, that is one form of outbound messaging, is some sort of advertisement, especially where there's already a lot of other like advertisements or bulletin boards, right? That you can kind of put those up there without it being considered like vandalizing and stuff like that.
I actually saw a couple of people from the GameStop era, and
Uh-huh.
they're doing the GameStop short squeeze out there with sandwich boards at intersections, being like, hold the line, buy GameStop. And I thought to myself, I could do that with a hex sign all day and just
Yeah,
say buy
totally.
hex and just get it in people's consciousness. I think we are planting the seeds for a lot of people to hear the first time about hex. And then when it's $1, they're going to be like, oh, that's $1 now, or $10 or whatever down the line. They're going to be like, oh, I should have bought this back when so-and-so told me about it, but I didn't. And then that'll be the moment that they take action.
I agree 1000% for sure. You're totally right. And that's kind of like a typical strategy, even when it comes to sales and whatnot, like that. Yeah, if you are selling someone something or you're trying to get them to hear more about your product, yeah, usually it's not the first time. Usually it's the second or the third or the fourth, however many times until they realize, hey, this person is tenacious, right? They keep coming back with the same opportunity and the same offer. And especially if you can prove that you've had results and success with it, which a lot of Hexicans can, then it's really an easy sell. Like the product is so good that it does sell itself. You just need to have that right opportunity for the person to, experience the product, as we mentioned, with say Staker.app, things like this. If they're not new to crypto, then they can get onboarded very easily. And we've got the tools and resources to make it not a complex experience, right? They can get on board. They've got this, pretty dashboard that they're looking at, and then they can see every single day based on their shares that, hey, they're earning a little bit of interest. And most people, I talk with my older brothers, their friends, and I tell you what, most of them, they're looking for like entrepreneurship ideas, right? They're like one of them's trying to start their own business in real estate, and I'm telling them, hey, that's awesome, that's great, but let me just remind you that the hacks that I set up for you, it was initially like $50, and now it's worth like
Yeah.
15,000. But
Yeah.
but I'm telling them like, hey, just a reminder that, hey, the hex stakes that you have that I set up, those are constantly working for you. And every single day, even if you don't get what you want today, or you don't feel like you've made progress, at least you've made daily yield from the inflation and penalties. So it's a really exciting concept when people can understand that literally every single day you're getting paid that you're staked. And what a great opportunity, because Richard did say in his earlier videos that if you ever try and trade, and you and I both know this, but if you ever tried to trade like your time for money, it just never works, because when you're sleeping, you're not able to make money. So if you can have something that does work for you and that generates yield and works for you while you're sleeping, then that's what the wealthy people do.
So you want to get rich. I'm going to tell you a little something about money. In this world, you don't see the richest people doing things with their time and getting paid hourly. There's not enough hours in the day. If you're the highest paid lawyer, the highest paid doctor, no matter how much you make, there's still just not enough hours in the day. There's only one of you, right? We may have different educations, different skills, different opportunities, but the one thing we all have the same is our time. So in this world, if you want to become truly wealthy financially, you need to do things which aren't based on your hours. That means that you need to start a business or own something, because when you're sleeping, the things that you own will still be working, right? So let's say you own a piece of real estate and you rent it out. When you go to sleep, your real estate's still working for you. Let's say you start a business and you have some employees doing the work. Once you can afford your first employee, you can waste your time however you like, assuming that the employee you hired is the right one and can do the job as well as you used to.
Especially if you've got a good work ethic for years and years, you can't even imagine that you can make more money by having something else work for you. It really blows your mind. And going back to the intersection, I don't think I would be out there with the sign now that I thought about it. I think I would pay one of those sign flippers to go out there with like a hex sign. And I might be over like in a little trailer or in the shade with a little table, helping people set up some MetaMask wallets and stuff.
Well, just real quick, it's true because, you know, anything that I've learned from sales, I've done a few sales jobs too. The last thing that you want to come off commission breath, right? Where like
Yeah.
you're almost like desperate, and it's like, oh, well, if this product is so good, then why does this person seem so desperate for the sale? You know, so I know what you mean when it comes to certain forms of advertising, and also what catches people's eyes the most. Because if you are kind of living how you preach, or you're right, you wouldn't necessarily need to be doing the sign flipping and holding. Yeah, you could kind of just direct that towards, you know, a booth or something like that where they could get further educated. But there's so many ideas that you mentioned that are really cool, and it's just the beginning for this kind of stuff.
It really is. And something that my eyes were open to is Crypto Heartbeat. I don't know if you've caught up on his videos, but he had the video, I'll link it below, where he talks about the 4 types of people. I would always talk to people like they wanted the same things in life that I wanted. If they did, then that resonated and I was really successful communicating with them. But there's a lot of people out there that are totally different than me. So what I've done is I've started asking people, what would you do if you won $1 million? And that question will tell you what type of a person they are. It'll tell you if they're into security. It'll tell you if they're into their passion and their projects. It'll tell you if they're a rational person, and it'll tell you if they're an idealistic person like myself. Like you ask me, what do you do with $1 million? It's like I'm buying an island and starting my own country. You know, we're going crazy. We're having fun.
Yeah.
But a lot of, you know, a lot of people you talk to, they're like, oh, I'd pay off my house. I'd pay off my credit card. I would put some money away for the kids, you know, college or weddings or whatever it is that responsible people do.
Right.
You know? Right.
It's interesting because I don't know why that's the major psychological number, but it is. $1 million is like something that, you know, most people can't comprehend and fathom. And then it's like, when you think about reality, like, that's not a lot of money.
Almost every American makes over $1 million in their lifetime. They just don't get it at one time. If you work 30 years and you make 30 grand a year, you're close to $1 million. A lot of the truck drivers will make 40 to 120 grand a year, depending on what they're hauling. So yeah, $1 million comes and goes a lot faster, especially if you got kids and a family. It does bring out that part of their brain that makes them think about more than the regular, everyday, mundane tasks that they're taking care of.
And you're right. Like any of us that have been in long enough, especially during the diffs and things like this, like you've got to have something that kind of restates your belief of why you're doing something. When everyone is doubting you, you kind of have to have your why reason. And yeah, I think a lot of us kind of have found that. But you're right. Most people, when they're working their day-to-day job, they're not having these big dreams. They're just focused on what's today, what's, you know, the family that you have to support, things like that. But it is those kinds of bigger dreams that you mentioned, say with the island and other things, that people should kind of start to aspire, at least. I mean, that's the first step in achieving any goal or having anything that you're setting out for, is to kind of visualize that first. And, you know, even if it's not a reality or you don't think it'll ever happen, and like there's a way to make it your reality in the future.
You mentioned the dip. How do you feel about this dip that we're in right now? I mean, a lot of people are experiencing, this is their first real dip, because a lot of them got in on the climb from, what was that, 8 cents to 50 cents, basically, was the last rip. And now this is their first dip. How are you handling this dip? How does this make you feel? What are your reactions to it?
I've been here for a very long time, just like all of us have. And this is nothing unusual. Like for me, it hasn't affected me at all. Aside from the only thing it has affected were some of the people that I gotten into Hex recently that are wondering the same thing that people were at the beginning, which is, why is the price dipping? What's going on? Is the sky falling? Is the world ending? And I kind of have to, you know, zoom out on the charts and kind of show them a little bit that, hey, this is just a market, right? And you've always got a cycle in a market, and just kind of like a continuous loop where, as you mentioned, there was the pump up that we had from the beginning of sacrifice phase, 8 cents to 56 cents, 50 something cents. And then now we're back down, but it's still above where we initially started pumping, right? Even at 16, 17, 18 cents, that's still better than the 8 cents that you and I experienced during June, during the actual the Hex meetup. So it's all kind of just relative. And the other thing is too, is if people are staked and they understand that they're earning that daily yield, then why does it matter unless they're selling that day, right? It should only matter if you're actually selling and realizing gains that the price is dipping. But for most people, that's not the case. Also, we had this happen last year too, right? November 19th, we had the big payday dump, and it was like 86.4 something percent dump. And it really does weed out the people that were kind of halfway on the fence. And then the people that were on the other half of the fence, it kind of solidifies it even deeper that, okay, this thing doesn't always just go up and to the right. It does in like a general logarithmic trend in form, but it's not something that just goes straight up forever, which I think is healthy. And I think it is good that we've had as many corrections as we've had, because once again, it's just the market itself working like a free market does.
Yeah, I appreciate your perspective because it's very similar to mine. You know, were you a day one FOMOer?
I day one FOMOed into the contract address that unfortunately,
Oh, no.
yeah. Dude, I've got like my biggest mistake in Hex was because I had messaged Richard. I was like, this is weird. Because I'd never used MetaMask, right? I'd used hardware wallets. I had done sending and I'd actually written to the contract for EOS and participated in EOS a long time ago.
Yeah.
But when it came to MetaMask, I had no idea that I wasn't actually interacting with the contract I was like sending to, because you had to like manually paste the contract. And so long story short, yeah, I day one FOMO'd into the contract address. And then honestly, dude, I was like really depressed because I messaged Richard while everyone else had their coins. I was like, why didn't I receive my coins? What's going on? He explained to me, hey, you donated it to the contract address, you know, try and not do that for the rest of your bag. And so it was kind of like a turning point where I let's just say it was FOMO, right? Like where I thought that I was getting the Hex and had FOMOed into it. But I'll tell you what, even with the rest of the bag that I just averaged in, I got a lot of those really good days, including the self-referral, right? The 32% bonus. I'd gotten a lot of those days added on, and that made up for the initial loss that I had. So had the FOMO, and yeah, that was pretty intense to see, right?
Well, we take so much for granted in this community. Like you said, you know, I messaged Richard, like someone would
Yep.
say, oh yeah, I messaged, you know, Jeff Bezos about this order I
Yeah,
had, and Jeff was like, whoa, calm down. Like that's
it's true.
insane. The fact that we have had interactions and we have the patience of this person that's made it financially. We It's amazing how we just gloss over that fact that the community has a leader like that I really appreciate.
You're right, because that was a certain point in time where the messages used to be like one or two direct messages and a couple questions, and that's great. But then the second that it starts getting to like, yeah, over 100 messages and things like that, it's really hard to keep up with. We did have the luxury and the convenience of being able to direct message Richard, and I'm still in a couple chats that if I really wanted his attention, I could get it through some of the moderator chats. But it's showing the times that are changing, and I think it's really exciting because this product wasn't just meant for, you know, Hexicans and whatnot. This was meant for like a world-changing idea and a world-changing product, and that can only happen if everyone is kind of participating. So it's cool to see that in under 2 years, it's already skyrocketed and launched up this far. And just to think where when you talk about mass adoption or people just getting involved that haven't heard about it before, but they have heard about the stock on the street, well, now they're getting into it in the future. And the S curve itself keeps just going up and up until we hit that major adoption moment that's just unstoppable.
Speaking of exciting rockets, let's talk about predictions here. We've got the Pulsechain coming out, and then we're going to have Hex on the two different chains. So how do you see this playing out over obviously during the launch period, but then after that in the next 2 to 5 years?
Here's what I will say. So I think that people are they're going to make their decisions, right? So some people I've heard of even right, the German and the Austrian. So Allin and Patrick, I've heard them both specifically talking that when Pulsechain comes out, they're going to dump or sell their eHex into Pulsechain, or sorry, into the Hex on Pulsechain, which is just Hex. But
Mhm.
then I hear some people like Funding Jim or just kind of like myself that are just going to sit back and keep both copies because I don't know which one's going to appreciate more over the other. And the other thing is too, like when it comes to a risk decision, I'm already set with what I have on Hex right now, which is just eHex. So I don't really need to do anything that's going to be more of a gamble or more of a risk to accidentally screw up my bag. But to answer your question, I think that people are going to make their decisions, right? Some will sell all of their side on eHex. Some might do the same on pHex for eHex. And then you're going to kind of just have this eventual equilibrium that settles, in my opinion, where they're kind of both at like a possibly a similar value. And then from there, you've got just different price discovery because with something like Pulsechain, the Hex on Pulsechain, that's going to allow people that couldn't afford the fees to get in. But something like eHex is still going to have the same smart contract. And I think it's just going to be bigger, longer stakes because that's kind of how people can justify those fees on eHex.
And once you see it studying out, where do you see the possible price or X of Pulse going?
I'm really bullish on Pulse. I'm very, very bullish on Pulse. And as far as the price goes, it's tough. I mean, let's just say it took a long time for X to reach a penny. And I think as far as Pulse being able to do that, I think that'll happen a lot sooner than people think. When you look at the supply, it's always kind of hard to fathom because most people just have like that market cap theory where, oh, we're just going to look at the supply, we're going to look at the current price, and 1 penny Pulse with the supply would be X dollar market cap, and that just breaks people's paradigms and their thoughts. But in reality, you got to think that it really is centrally owned and has a lot of financial centralization that Hex does, and that what made Hex successful. So I kind of look at those aspects and those parameters of what has made Hex successful, say with the origin address and with kind of like that De Beers diamonds analogy. And I just think like, yeah, a penny Pulse, I think we could see a lot sooner than people think. Once again, sooner than we saw with something like Hex. With things like Hex and eHex in the next 2 to 5 years, I mean, once we break that dollar threshold, I think that'll be like the penny threshold that we broke, where now it's like, okay, sky is the limit, and people can see numbers that are actually realistic for Hex to achieve.
You sacrifice for Pulse, is that correct?
Totally, yeah. I sacrificed in a big way. Like I said, day one FOMO for Hex wasn't the best because I didn't know exactly what I was doing, but I knew damn well what I was doing with Pulse. And here's the thing, I put in at least, honestly, probably over like 130 something times the amount of principal that I ever put in Hex. And so I think about like, man, if Pulse does anything that Hex has done, and I don't even need to touch the Pulse in the first place because I'm already set. But if it does anything that Hex has done, then now I've got 130 times more than what I did with Hex that's got me to where I am today. Like, this is just numbers that are hard to believe and hard to fathom. It is those decisions that people make and the risks that people take that are what get them to the wealth. Like, the wealth doesn't just, happen overnight and you don't just stumble across it where it just falls on your lap. Like, no, these people that got wealthy, these people that are wealthy now, they made the decisions that were, things that other people didn't do.
If you want to blow your mind sometime, this is what I like to do. If you sacrifice for Pulse, take the amount that you sacrifice just in dollars and divide it by 3 cents, because the pre-sale for Ethereum was 3 cents. And that's going to give you how many Ethereum that you would have had if you bought the pre-sale of Ethereum. Times that number times $4,500. The back of your head will just lift up. It will blow your mind.
Your mind's been blown countless times.
And if you didn't get into Pulse, because if you didn't get into the sacrifice phase, I would tell you just do $1. take all of your hex or all that you're planning on putting into Pulse, all the money you plan on putting into Pulse, and divide it by $1, right? And then take that number and times it by 4,500. And that was a 7-year span that you could have turned 3 cents into $4,500. And I believe that Pulse will be much faster than ETH for 2 simple reasons. Number one, it's going to deliver on the promises of ETH 2.0. And number two, way more people know about crypto and Pulse than they knew about Ethereum back in the day. Because I remember I was just wrapping my head around Bitcoin when Ethereum came out, and everyone was buying the dip, right? They're bragging about 30-cent ETH, and now it is inside knowledge, but not like it was back then. It's going to be accelerated a lot.
I agree 1,000%. Like if you listen to the, it's like Bree Tep on Twitter, but he's one of the Pulsechain core developers. And I've got a clip on my channel that I actually downloaded from someone else.
I retweeted that all over the place. I'm like, guys, this is really exciting.
Yeah. Bretep had mentioned that for Ethereum, it took about like 2 years for them to get a couple hundred nodes. And Pulsechain is not even launched. And we already have we have over 395 because it was full nodes at the time that were completely synced, but he had still had some in the backlog. So anyways, we've got 395 nodes, which took Ethereum 2 years to get 200. And so like, if we're already at this scale and we're not even launched yet, I think that you mentioned, you've got the things like beating Ethereum 2.0 to proof of stake. You've got the completely deflationary, like people don't understand that no inflation, like that's a damn pumpamental if I've ever heard one. And then just all of these other things that kind of just make the game theory of Richard Hart's, now his first project, right? Because his first product was Hex, now his first project is Pulse. I think people that were asleep on the wheel with Hex that feel like they missed the boat, even though that's not the case, I feel like those people are not wanting to make the same mistake twice.
For people who haven't been to a Hex meetup, just imagine, like, you can see how excited me and Brand are getting right now. Imagine like 200 of us in one small room just freaking out about this stuff. And that's like the electricity that you get at a meetup. So I highly recommend people find a meetup for sure.
Well, it's true because, like, once again, this is all just success that we've collectively had with Hex. But honestly, dude, I think Pulse is going to be, because Hex was gatekept to the highest degree that I've ever seen.
It's still gatekept horribly.
I agree completely, and that helps me like keep my track that, Hex was gatekept completely, and we still did the 10,000x in under 2 years. But I think Pulse really is going to be that catapult that launches. Like it's a unison where the actual, it's kind of like a scale, right, that balances this way and this way. But so we've seen the Pulsechain Telegram. I think now it's over like 50,000 on Telegram, like 50,000 members, I guess, in the group.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But then Hex, it was like, it's been around for almost like 3 years now because the group has been around longer. But they're
yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, they're at like 35, maybe 40,000. But Pulse is same thing with like the Ethereum and the Pulse nodes that we mentioned. Pulse is just way up here, and then it's bringing Hex up here as people are hearing about it and finding out about it. Because most people, they hear the largest airdrop in history. They hear that they're going to get their coins copied over, but they haven't heard much about Hex. So that kind of opportunity of Pulse, the virality that's not being gatekept, allows them to hear about Hex. And once again, they kind of just work their way up in a seesaw upwards.
You're going to be at Vegas in March. Are you planning on attending that?
I'm going to be there. I know Maddie, he's wanted me to speak. I'm not too sure yet what all the actual details are. I'm so comfortable behind the computer that sometimes if I end up doing a presentation, it'll be very succinct and very precise. Public speaking can just be so much more different, in my opinion, than just behind a computer, So yeah, I'll be there. I'm looking forward to it. There's going to be the 1,369 people, and at the end of the day, I'm excited to meet everyone. When we had got to meet, and a lot of other Hexicans and myself got to meet during this run in Vegas, that was great. And honestly, I was a little disappointed because I didn't get to meet everyone, and there was like a lot of people that I got to see for a second. Like, I'm glad you and I got a picture, because with a lot of people, I had said, hey, but I never got a picture, So now it's like, okay, I know what to do the next time so I don't make the same mistake twice. I'm just, going to be getting a lot of photos with everyone that feels comfortable, and just try and maximize that, because there's going to be a lot more people this time around, almost 4 times the amount of people, actually more, but more than 4 times the amount of people than there was then. And that was hard enough to keep up with. I'm looking forward to it.
What do you got planned between now and March?
Not a whole lot, but I've actually thought about maybe, because California is just a state away. There's a couple Hexicans in California that want to hang out and want to visit. I might make like my own little separate road trip over to California, and just drive over there before the actual Vegas convention, and kind of hang out with some of the Hexicans that I never got to hang out with, like Crypto Kool-Aid. He's one of them that used to live in Seattle, and then he had moved to California, and him and I were supposed to hang out before he had moved to Cali, but life just gets in the way. So I think it would be kind of cool to do my own kind of separate meetup, where maybe I just drove to a few of the major, because Cali's a big state, but maybe LA and all these different subsections of California, and kind of do like a couple mini meetups. That's not completely in the books yet, but it's something that I've been thinking about for a long time that I'd like to do, is meet some of the Hexicans around the other states.
Do you got anything else you want to add to this conversation?
We've talked a little bit about Pulsechain, about Hex, the community, right? Some of the outbound messaging.
I'm really happy with the way this conversation turned out.